back to Build by Design. Today we're going to be learning about sketching using Inventor. So first off, we're going to start by creating a new file, and then double clicking on standard.ipt. And now we're in the part environment. For the first thing we're going to want to do is right click and create a new sketch. This is very similar to Fusion. Now we're going to go ahead and select the plane that we do want to sketch off of. And now this is the sketch environment. So once again, this is very similar to that of Fusion in purpose, but is going to look a little bit different. So now you should be fairly familiar with creating sketch geometry from your practice with Fusion. So I'm not going to get into too much detail into that. It's really a similar process using Inventor as compared to Fusion. So I'm just going to start creating the outline of the part that I want to create with lines. And then I'm going to go over to arc and then put some arcs in between these lines to create a complete profile. So now as you notice how everything is currently green. This means that it is not fully constrained, or that if I wanted to move things around, I could move them around and change the dimensions freely. Now since Inventor is a parametric modeler, as to in Fusion's non-parametric modeler, we don't want this to be the case because we're looking for a very precise and consistent part generation and creation so that we can easily manufacture them. So to start defining them, I'm going to start adding a bunch of tangent constraints between the lines and the arcs. Now as you can see, this is a pretty fast process and it works very similarly to how you're used to in Fusion. So now this part, actually, I want to adjust it a little bit because if I had added a tangent there, it wouldn't have ended up how I wanted it to actually be there in the end. So I actually went back and modified it to where I wanted. Continue to lock down everything, adding equal constraints at the arcs. So these arcs are always going to be equal. Now we're going to do the same thing to the lines. The lines are going to be the same length. So these constraints are pretty much the same constraints that we use within Fusion already. So now without adding any dimensions, we've already pretty well defined what this part's going to look like. We're actually going to add another constraint, a vertical constraint to make those vertical. And then finally we're going to add a construction line. So this is done by creating a line and then selecting it and then clicking construction line. So what this indicates to anyone looking back at my sketch in the future, they can see that I indicated that I wanted symmetry throughout my part, even though this part is not necessarily used with a mirror function, but it's done that. So now I'm going to constrain this part to the origin. So what this does is just make sure that the part is in a definite location on the canvas, so it's not it can't move around per se. Now we're going to go in and actually start dimensioning things. So as we start dimensioning things, you're going to notice that some of these lines and arcs will actually turn purple. These dimensions are what really turn and change Inventor from Fusion. So using Dimension, we're able to define the part exactly how we want it and then go back and make changes that will be reflected in our 3D models. You can add dimensions to between pretty much anything. Well, just as we did in Fusion, the difference with this is the dimensions will continue to affect the model as we go post 3D extrusions. So another cool thing with the dimensions is you can actually use algebraic problems within your dimension thing. So we can do 2.5 divided by 2 if we didn't want to actually do the math for that to make it 1.25. So if you want to go back and edit this dimension, we can just double click on it and edit it as you want. So I'm actually going to change that to 1 inch. As you notice, it automatically adjusts the radius on the opposite side because those were used with the equal constraint. So now, as you can see, the entire part is purple, which means that it is fully constrained. So now I'm going to add a couple more circles into here. Now we're going to go ahead and dimension these circles to fully constrain them and make sure that they're the exact size that we want them to be. So one thing I do want to do though is I want to make sure that these circles are equal to each other. Instead of having to go back and edit both dimensions and adding dimensions, I can just use the equal constraint and click both circles that I want to be equal, and they will remain that way throughout. So if I want to go back and change that circle to a different size, it will adjust both circles at the same time. So now there's this last piece that's not fully constrained. We're gonna go ahead and add a horizontal constraint to make it completely locked down. And there we go, there we have our sketch. You now know how sketching works in Inventor and how it's different from Fusion. Thanks for watching.